We now proceed to the next session, which is the colloquium conversations between Chris Gopalakrishnan and Professor Ravindran. Of course, they need no introduction. So instead, what I did was I asked them to describe AI in a sentence. And this is what they said. Chris says this is a transformational, fundamental technology driving change that will drive change in the next 30 years. Professor Ravindran says AI is a technology that's pregnant with possibilities for transformation, only if you are patient and develop it to a point where it may be used responsibly. Now, we will, of course, hear more as Ravi gets into a conversation with Chris, followed by a Q&A with you. Over to you, Ravi.
So thank you, Krishna. And well, he did give me a sentence, and so I went rambling on that one sentence. But morning, Chris, and thank you for agreeing to spend time with us.
Thank you.
And so we are in an academic setting, and so in general we have a good idea of how AI is viewed in academia. But you have the pulse of the Indian IT industry and in general the IT industry globally, right? So how do you view the AI adoption and innovation that's happening in the industry now?
See, I'm going to take a little bit time to answer this question to set the context. First and foremost, before I begin, I want to, this is my first visit to the Institute after the NIRF rankings were announced. So, big applause for IIT Madras. To get the #1 ranking fourth year in a row, but more importantly, the #1 university in the country. So that's first time you're getting that overall ranking. So congratulations to IIT Madras, and we are all glad that we are here today. And I also want to thank Robert Bosch Center here for supporting this along with Itihasa. First and foremost, I believe this technology that we are talking about, the machine learning piece, the ability of using computers for solving problems with hitherto were not solved using digital computers to some extent, because we didn't have the power, we didn't have the algorithms, etc. I think that to me is the shift that is driving this. So when digital computers were introduced in the middle of the last century, 1940s, 50s, etc., it opened a new class of problems to be solved using this technology. And the class of problems are those where we understood how the problem needs to be solved. We understood the algorithm. We could program that algorithm into a machine and then use the machine to solve problems at scale, etc., at speed, and so anything that could be described as a process, anything that could be encapsulated into a program, the computer would solve. Now we can use a machine to solve problems where we don't actually know how the solution is arrived at. We can now describe the outcomes that we desire. We can show sample data. We can actually program in a different way now. So you're using the machine to learn how to solve the problem. It could be self-learning, but it learns how to solve the problem by itself. We don't need to know the answer, and that's opening up a large space of problems to be solved, and that's why it's very exciting, because again, a new class of problems that can be solved using machine, and the change is fundamental, because see why computing was impactful, because it impacted every aspect of our life. It was accessible to everybody. It's a fundamental transformational technology. This also is now accessible to everybody. It's being democratized. AI is democratized through tools like Siri and Google Home and things like that. It's being used in every industry, every field. It's used in research, physics. We can every field is getting impacted. So it's a fundamental technology. The second point I want to make is when something like this happens, huge opportunity opens up. Huge amount of wealth is being created. In 1980, 1979 is when I passed out from here. Around that time, the India's GDP was $180 billion. Today, it's $2.7 trillion. Global GDP went from $11 trillion to $80 trillion during the period. Indian IT industry today is about 8% of India's GDP, 7 to 8% of India's GDP. So from nothing, in the last 50 years, it has grown to 7-8% of India's GDP. So it had some role to play in the growth of Indian economy. And globally also, if you look at the top 5 companies through market cap, all of them are, from the digital computing industry. So you can say that, the growth of the global GDP benefited from digital computing technology. India benefited from this technology. And so AI and machine learning will have a significant impact in the growth of global economy as well as Indian economy in the next 30 years. The third point I want to make is, I believe India has a very important role to play in how this technology is used. And most of these points were made by both Professor Mahesh and Bhaskar. I strongly believe that, if you look at how digital computer has actually created a new haves and have not, the disparity, it's significant. And the beneficiaries, the top 1% getting all the wealth that's being created in the world, etc. Now, if you look at the next 30 years, are we going to continue this disparity, or are we going to address this disparity? Now, India is still developing. It's a poor country. It's developing still. Per capita income is about $2,600, and so we have to seriously look at any of these development. Is it inclusive? Is it going to address the issue of affordability? Is it going to address the issue of literacy? Is it going to address the issue of jobs, etc.? And there are many concerns about introduction of AI and machine learning. How does it impact AI, how does it impact jobs? How does it impact wealth creation, etc.? So we need to, I think, more important than any other country, we need to actually look at how it's being used, where it's being used. There are significant benefits. So, for example, in a country where there, I think, estimated to be 1,000 radiologists, can we now use technology to address the issue of lack of technical expertise? Can we use it for reading X-ray machines, or can we use it to read any medical image? We should, because that's how we can bring quality healthcare to the remotest area and things like that. And so the places where it's going to be used, we need to be very careful in choosing, initially at least, so that the benefits accrue to maximum number of people. And that's what I believe India provides as an opportunity. Industry is, driving the adoption of this technology on the ground, because industry, business brings the benefit of technology to society through its products, to services, etc. We are starting to see this both at the startup level as well as within industries. We are seeing these benefits now being brought to society in India, and the cost angle and the affordability angle is at the forefront. It's even driven by our people also. Even if you just look at something like subscription to Apple, subscription services they have created, Spotify, etc. It's something like $9.99 per month in the US, and it's all you can consume for 999 rupees per year in India. So companies understand that you need a different pricing mechanism in India. And when it comes to AI, machine learning also, I think they will do that. Industry is doing this. But there's a long way to go. One of the questions was, where do we use it? The ethics behind it, practical uses behind it. Many of the technologies today developed in US or China, I think we have to also lead in this area. We have to create the capability, we have to create the capacity. If so much wealth is going to be created, can we own the IP, etc. That's what I think the challenge for academia and industry are.
So I'll pick up on a couple of points that you made. So one thing was about being cautious about which areas we should pick up, we should adopt AI in. And you think that should be self-regulated, or should there be some intervention from the government to do those things? Because I'm asking you this question because I've heard this little scary talk in a lot of panels where people have started already talking about regulating the AI industry, which I don't think is the right way to go, but I would like to views on that.
So definitely when technology is yet not developed, it's not applied, we need very light regulation. And self-regulation is one part of it. But unfortunately, 95% of the people will conform to self-regulation, 5% of the people are not going to. So you need some kind of regulation. It could be a societal body, it could be an industry body, it could be an academic body, but we do need some kind of regulation. Or we also need the government to create a safe environment for this technology to be tried or put on pilot. That's another way to actually spur innovation, but in a controlled manner. Create a sandbox where something could be tested. And I think even Reserve Bank came out with a concept of a sandbox for trying financial innovations. So government could also come forward and create sandboxes where these technologies can be tried in the healthcare area, in the transportation area, in the financial services area, etc. But we do need to be aware that technology can be misused. We don't understand the consequences fully. So self-regulation, ideal, but we are not living in an ideal world. So industry regulation or academic regulation as well as government regulations are required.
And the second point I'm going to pick up from what you said. So we talked about innovation in the US and China, right? So how much of it do you see happening driven in India, driven from India, and what do you think is stopping it?
Not enough, and it starts with funding. We do need to increase the funding for research in India, both public and private. And the increase in funding from private sources, I believe, needs to increase significantly when compared to investment by government. So we do need to scale this up significantly. We need to see when we had the digital computing revolution, was introduced. Similarly, I believe that if this is a new tool that we are going to use for everything that we do, we have to look at education and training at all levels. At the highest level, to create the professionals who will do the research, to use of AI and machine learning on a day-to-day basis, as well as common man. When a loan is rejected by the bank by a computer algorithm, right? They need to be aware that there's something like an algorithm that's running in the background which is actually rejecting. Or when they call a bank and there's a machine answering which has a human voice, and which seems to be interacting with you very intelligently, they still need to know that it's actually a machine in the background which is actually interacting with them. You know, the implications of that are huge.
So I have a slightly longer question for you, because this is something I'm very passionate about. So this is picking up on the skilling model that you said was happening with the IT industry when when IT became a big thing. So one can argue that that kind of skilling did not really lead to innovation, and in some sense we remain followers in the IT space, right? And I'm unfortunately seeing something like that happening with the AI space as well. There are a lot of people from kind of, I would say, unregulated market who are rushing into offering AI reskilling and so on and so forth. And is this going to, produce a generation of AI engineers who are very skilled at using tools that are built by Google's and, or some of the Chinese leaders? So, what do you think?
So, both of these are required. It's not one versus the other. So you need to think about the context in which the IT services industry developed in India. We need to take our strengths and leverage it to the fullest extent. Our strengths were trained manpower, and because we are a developing country, lower cost. So we married that with the ability to do remote work. Because technology allowed you to do remote work, we created an IT industry here in India. That has become the standard for the world to deliver services remotely, including now R&D is being done in India now. It's now an accepted practice that remote work is possible. And in some sense, we can say that, we gave that to the world, we pioneered it, we created a $170 billion industry, we created jobs for 4 million people, so nothing to be sneezed at. So I don't see that as in any way bad. And industry came forward and made that happen. Academic institutions didn't train enough people, so industry came forward to train enough people to the tools and the techniques that are needed. I think it's needed in AI and machine learning also. Okay, we need large number of people to train everyone to use these tools, and that's why I think it should be introduced in schools, it should be introduced in colleges, everywhere. Even if you're learning English literature, if you want to do research or if you want to do scanning of papers and things like that, if you want to scan articles, you have to use some tool today. And it probably will be an AI machine learning tool, so you need to be trained to use that tool. So broad training is required. Having said that, we need to learn from past experience. So as you said, we don't have that much, in IP and things like that. So at least in this wave, we need to create IP, we need to create new knowledge, we need to create new products. We need to know how these algorithms work. So today, when we use these tools, we don't know whether it has biases, whether it's been tested with Indian data, whether we are applying it properly. We blindly use it and we are satisfied and happy with the results that we get. Or we don't know how to evaluate whether the answer that we're getting is the right answer or the wrong answer. We get some answer which satisfies us, then we go forward. So that should not continue. So we do need to do basic research. We need to do, we need to create new knowledge, and we need to be at the forefront of creating IP in these areas.
So, especially in Europe, you would see a lot of initiatives where there is a significant overlap between academia and industry. You would often find teams that have equal number of academics and the industry folks working on projects where they are both looking at translational research, but as well as working on fundamental topics driven by industry needs. And so we don't see too much of that in India. So one part of it, I believe, is slightly controversial. Is one part of it, I believe there's a trust deficit between the industry and academia. At least from the academic point of view, it does seem that way sometimes. So what's your take on that?
IIT Madras is a good example of where a lot of collaboration is
If I
happening.
may, we seem to be an outlier.
Yeah, but other institutes must look at this example and look at what is working, what are the best practices, how trust is built. Trust is built when both sides, it's just not one side. Both sides come together and decide to work together. There will always be challenges and problems, and we need to address them. That's the only way this will go away. I don't see any reason why it cannot happen. And we also need to think big in terms of, looking at large programs, large projects. We need to look at working with global companies. So we need to think global, we need to think big, we need to address this issue of trust. I strongly believe that, again, IIT Madras model of creating a development office is very important, because working with industry requires you to sell yourself to the industry. In the US, for example, I'm told that 25% of any principal investigator's time goes into actually, bringing in funds, right? So they have to sell their program project to the industry, get the funding required, etc. So, we need to change the way that we do things. We need to professionalize the fundraising also.
Yeah, so my follow-up to that was, I completely understand that academia also needs to, so one of the main things that I see when I talk to industry folks is that the lack of, proven track record that comes from academia. So that makes a lot of people wary. So in what way you think that academic institutions can build up this kind of a trust? What would take you?
So, again, on both sides, the industry must work with the academic institutions to fund large programs, and some programs are going to fail. See, in the startup world, we understand that 7 or 8 startups are going to fail out of 10. So why are we not willing to accept that, some research programs may not give you the desired outcomes? So maybe in the time frame that we want, maybe it'll happen much later. So I think we need to get into accepting that research is open-ended and the outcomes may not happen in the time frame that we expect. On the academic side, I think we need to think big, which is at least, an institute like IIT must have 10 large programs where the budgets are 100 crores plus. Because we need to, because that will result in goals that are visible. So when, what all that happens is, you produce a paper, of course the paper is published in the best journal, etc., fine. The common man does not understand what is the benefit to society because of that. Whereas, you say, I have a technology that will give you clean drinking water at 1 paise per liter or something like that. The common man clearly understands that. So that may require a large, investment in research and things so that large number of people working. I think we need to think big in some areas which benefit society, may require basic research, may require applied research, may require a combination of these. But what is interesting now, the opportunity now is, as I said, every industry is getting transformed. We have so many disruptive technologies that are now coming out, 3D printing, gene editing, um, IoT, I can go on and on actually, not just AI and machine learning, where there's significant opportunity to leverage that technology to do interesting things, synthetic biology. So many things are happening now. And it's very exciting period to be a academician and a very exciting period to be in industry because every industry will get disrupted.
So, so you are a great believer in philanthropic funding for research, and IIT Madras has been a major beneficiary of that. Right? So, what do you believe is the role in private funding? Should it come through philanthropy from the government, from the industry side also, or should it be more goal-driven?
So, every source must be explored, and every source must actually increase the funding that happens. I also think every institute must look at, maybe an institute like IIT must look at 10 large partnerships with industry, not just for research, but some funding education also. See, today, lifelong learning, is a given. We all need to continuously learn. So there is a role for institute like IIT in that lifelong learning process, continuing education. So, industry does a lot of training today of its employees, and I think institute like IIT can actually benefit from that. Maybe online, classroom, everything, put together. So, government funding must increase, clearly. Government funding should not differentiate between basic or applied. Both are required. In fact, probably government is the patient funding that is required for basic research. Philanthropy is also similar, actually. It is patient funding. It can look at basic as well as applied research. Industry's funding must increase, but it will probably be directed towards applied research because they want results in 3 years, 5 years, etc. They want to go back to their board and say, I spent 100 crores and here is the benefit that we got out of this. Applied research will reduce the risk and the time frame required for returns are also shorter. We also need to create a pipeline of lab to market, taking research and creating products and businesses so that the economic benefit is also visible. So all of these things need to be done. And the positive cycle, the virtuous cycle that we need to create is the education and the research driving societal benefit, creating economic value, and that gets invested back into the academic institution, the research infrastructure and things like that. That positive, virtuous cycle must be created and can't actually be disconnected. If it's disconnected, and today, it seems to be disconnected, and maybe rightly so. In our stage of development that we are in today, the role of IITs is to produce good students who can get good jobs, right? But I think we need to shift to knowledge creation, research, and benefits to society in actually taking advantage of this knowledge. And again, when I look at the stage at which we are, I think, so this is something that has happening parallel to the AI machine learning that we are talking about, because many technologies are now disrupting industry. So there's a role for IITs and research institutions to play here, to build wealth for the country.
Okay. So to bring the discussion back a little bit to AI. So one of your pet themes is the synergy between brain research and AI, and you have been funding several initiatives on it. Can we have your thoughts on where should that go?
So we do need to think about how efficient nature is. Everything seems to be optimized, everything seems to be done in a way in which resources are used very efficiently, there's very little waste. And gain insights from that and then apply research and engineering to that so that we can replicate it. We have been doing this, the whole history of humankind can be said as, us trying to learn from nature and replicate it, and hence when you look at computing, when you look at machine learning, the best that is there, the most efficient is the brain, right? And so how can we learn by studying the brain, understanding the brain? We may not replicate it exactly the same way, but it actually gives you insights, or it drives research in a direction in which we will create better models for hardware, software, better models for machine learning. Today, computer is a brute force tool. Okay? We throw the computing power at the problem and solve it. Why did machine learning really take off? Because the availability of GPU and we were able to do parallel computing. We had cheap computing available, cost came down significantly. And so we were able to do that for even silly thing as talking to your Amazon Echo or something like that, Siri. But we don't realize that, there's massive server farms at the background processing your simple query like, what is the news today? So how can we learn from brain and create better models? That's one aspect of it. Second is, it's the most exciting, is the last unknown. If we can understand brain, we understand us better. What makes us human, what is intelligence, what is consciousness, and even address issues related to aging and aging-related disorders. Neurodegenerative diseases are going to be a significant problem for society. For us in India, we'll have 200 million people above the age of 65 in another 20 years. Very large population. 1 in 4 or 5 will have some neurological disorder. So can we slow it? Can we find cures? Can we prevent? So again, significant opportunity, and it's something that needs to be done. Everything requires us to understand the brain.
So as one of the leading AI researchers said, tongue-in-cheek, the biggest contribution of deep learning seems to be to global warming. So with all the compute power that deep learning systems take up, that might actually be true. So I want to talk a little bit about the themes of the colloquium today. Right? So the 3 themes we have chosen are says that it reflects what are the challenges that we have to address to have wider applicability, adoption of AI in India. Right? So the first thing we have picked up is, so I'll go over one by one and ask your views on those. Right? The first thing we picked up is AI in manufacturing and AI in industry. Right? So we see a lot of successful applications of AI, especially in things like you said, Siri and all the Google, and mostly on internet, social media, etc., etc. Right? But AI has a role to play in looking at things like, automation, yes, but that's a lot more that you can do than just automation in looking at manufacturing processes. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, I strongly endorse it, and we can look at how we can leverage AI. But having said that, I would also be careful in looking at impact on jobs. In India, we have a challenge which is probably unique. Part of our country lives in 19th century, part of our country lives in 20th century, and part of our country lives in 21st century, right? So how do we look at 40% of the population dependent on agriculture, which is about 13 to 15% of the economy? So very low productivity. That no education or very little education, how do we move them to something that they can do? Then we need to look at, the 20th century, people who have some education, some, the middle class primarily in the country. And then we have people who are today global citizens, can work anywhere in the world, are driving some of the innovations, etc., and the startups that are here in the country. So this is a very massive challenge, and when we look at applying these technologies in a broad fashion, we need to be careful about addressing the issue of jobs, society, etc. So I would probably drive adoption to address issues like how can we give quality healthcare to everyone? How can we create jobs in doing that? So that's where, as a society, as a government, as IIT, I hope we give priority. And these are things which probably some other country will not address. They will look at how can we create a factory with no people. I think we should look at how can we provide quality healthcare to the last person in the country, or quality education.
Sure. So, I mean, that is something which we are already seized upon, right? So, the reason we took these were we thought these were not topics that people are talking about. I mean, healthcare is something that very much even the government has actually made that as the first use case for AI now, right? So, then, so you are...
So I'm not discouraging, but widespread adoption, or, we may use it for hazardous tasks, or we may use it for where we require high precision. We may use it for improving quality to the next level. I don't know. So we need to be very careful.
Exactly. So the answers that we would need in the Indian context would be different than what they would need in the Western context. So this is something that as Indians we should discuss and find a solution for. That's what we are looking at. So the second thing which has been brought up multiple times in the morning already both by the director and Professor Mahesh is on the ethics and fairness in using AI. So we are talking about a whole bunch of soft issues. So that is not just ethics and fairness, but there's also things about policy and about explainability of AI. And these are things that are looking at wider adoption. So what are the challenges you think that we should be looking at in that space, especially in the Indian context?
I think we've discussed that throughout our interaction. Clearly, bias is a problem as it stands today. Completeness of data. Does the data represent the universe to which we want to apply? When self-learning happens, reinforcement is possible of what the data represents. So how do we avoid that? How do we apply it to the right problems relevant to society? So all of these issues, I think, we must look at. Today we can create life in the lab, partially because of AI and machine learning tools, which allows you to look at DNA sequencing data and understand it actually. So how do we, know, when to use it, when not to use it? The long-term implications are huge. So all of these, I think, we need to think about. And I strongly believe that we can't, ethics is not something that we can inherit from somebody else. It has to be homegrown. It has to be driven by the needs of our society, our culture. And so this is this is a place where we must take leadership and invest heavily. And we must be driving the ethics around this from India. I have no doubt about it.
So I can't agree more with you. And especially given a country like India, those norms could change from region to region. So there's not going to be a single ethical standard for India that we can adopt. But there are also questions like what would be the GDPR equivalent for India?
But I think we should, think of India as a single country and do it. Let's not split it into multiple.
No, I'm not talking about that that way. Okay, but fine. I think all of these issues will come out in the panel. Let's
Okay.
not get into the argument on the panel.
GDPR, again, if data is, the asset that is going to drive the development in the future, I strongly endorse this need to own this data. See, again, we need to go back to how the technology developed. It developed as a tool for professionals, as a tool for quote unquote geeks. And now it's impacting everybody's life, day-to-day life. Huge amount of data about consumers are created, and huge amount of wealth is created. So I talked about, top 5 companies in the world by market cap are all digital computing companies, right? And if you look at where did the wealth come from, it came mostly from of course, some of them are manufacturing companies, but primarily the data is driving the wealth creation. What did we get as benefit out of that? So there are issues that we need to, talk about. If, let's say, company XYZ derives $10 billion of income out of the data that they collected from India, how much tax are they paying in India? They may say that we are offering free service, there's no direct revenue. So there's no tax to be paid, right? So GDPR is one aspect, which is the privacy aspect. I think that we need to look at, but more importantly is the economic benefit derived out of data, and how is that shared? Typically, you can't give it back to every citizen. So it happens through the tax that the government collects. So we need to have a fair mechanism of tax collection also, so that the value accrues to us in India.
Yeah, so I don't think that is a perspective most academicians have, so it's good to get that. And the final panel is on AI for the next billion. Right? So typically when people talk about AI for the next billion in Indian context, they immediately go to languages, low resource language, and doing more localization and things like that. But there's also, an equipment angle to it. How do you deliver AI to the next billion, right? So you can't certainly rely on all the cloud computing power and GPUs on the edge and so on and so forth. So that's another issue that needs to be looked at, and that's uniquely Indian. Because I don't think others will address this question for us.
No, so we have to increase the investment into providing the infrastructure locally in the country. We need to, so some of the ingredients are there. I know it's amazing that we have the best telecom infrastructure in the world, most affordable telecom infrastructure in the world. Cell phones are today, smartphones are available, at 4,000, 5,000 rupees. So affordability has been to some extent addressed, which allow people to get services, get some of the benefits. I think we need to look at, can we provide answers to questions to the farmers? Can we provide healthcare? Can we provide financial services? So that's how I think this technology is going to benefit the billions of people who need access to this at an affordable price. And the technology infrastructure that's required for this, I think we need to make sure that we invest in that and we make it available. We invest in the capacity and the capability building so that this technology develops in India, and it again addresses the issues and the problems in an inclusive manner again for India. I think all of those things are required, and that's how we'll make sure that it benefits the billion people, and including who owns the data. and the economic benefit that comes out of it. More than ownership, the economic benefit is also important.
Sure. So I was recently reading this article on this experiment in Bihar, where farmers are able to use these apps. And the writer was actually saying that he was getting better download speeds in rural Bihar than he got in Bangalore. So I guess we are well on our way to addressing that gap.
So I think that's an amazing change, an amazing piece of infrastructure that we have built, and I think it's going to benefit us.
So thank you. So I'll throw it open to the audience for any questions to Chris.
If I may, please state your name, your role and organization, and keep your questions brief and sharp and related to AI.
Yeah, so one of the things that, particularly in health, till now data, whatever in data, even sometimes partial data was available only to select people in the government. Yeah, only partial data. I mean, whatever data was available, very often it was partial data. Data collection has improved only in the last 2-3 decades. Is available primarily to the government. In one thing is particularly that of disease, new diseases new epidemics that are about to happen, or pandemics and so on. And the fact of the matter is, in many cases, the only solution is actually herd immunity. There is no treatment actually, there's only mitigation, particularly with viruses. And herd immunity means you have to sacrifice people. I mean, not necessarily death, but getting afflicted and so on. And nature has been picking the people who get afflicted. There's no other way. Until the herd gets immunized, unless certain number of people get afflicted, it's not going to solve the problem, right? Very often governments have known this and let nature pick, and they just focus on the mitigation measures, how to reduce the impact and so on. Now, if you start having tools which partial data can start predicting this and let everybody know, this actually can create a problem. Okay. I mean, it's not just a question of bad uses and so on. This is not the conventional, typical ethical problem of putting something to take control of people and all that. It's not. It is just that, or you take the 1991 economic crisis. I'm sure, at that time the finance minister and prime minister knew much more than many others. And maybe it would not have been good for everybody to know what they knew, or even to guess what they might know based on partial data. You may not have all their data, but you may have enough data because of all these new tools. And maybe that would have caused a panic or anything, So that's an issue that, has anybody thought about it?
No, it's actually not a new
issue. It goes
issue.
Beyond ethics, yeah.
No, this is not a new problem, I believe, because that's why we have invented this representative form of democracy, right? We don't want, a democracy where everybody participates. Of course, it's not feasible also, but partly it's because some information must be available only to some people to make the decision, and hopefully they will, because they're representatives of the people, they'll make the right decision, and we have elected them to make those decisions. Similarly, I think, we need to create those structures that can look at this data and hopefully take the right decisions. And if we create these structures properly, I think it will happen. We also need to create these sandboxes where data is available widely for research purposes, so some of these predictions can indeed happen. And of course, then we need to use that data, we use those insights properly.
Hi, my name is Nandana Sengupta. I'm an assistant professor at Azim Premji University, but joining IIT Delhi School of Public Policy next month. I'm really glad you brought about the question of representation and bias in AI. My question to you is, how important do you think is that in these kind of conversations that we're having, how important is representation to these conversations? So whether that be in terms of gender, so more women in a room like this, or in terms of having social scientists who think about the ethics or the economics or the sociology of these questions, and what is IIT Madras doing about it, and what do you think can be a way of making even these conversations more inclusive?
I agree with you, so I'm going to give it to Professor Ravindran to talk about IIT Madras doing in this regard.
Sure. Yeah, so we completely agree with you, and we have been starting some efforts on this. So in fact, last month we had this symposium on web science about the impact of the web on society and things like that. So we had sociologists, economists, even physicists who were part of the gathering. And we are starting to look at issues like AI and policy and ethics in collaboration with our humanities department. And later on, we will also be making larger announcement on this towards the end, so wait for a week.
This is a follow-up question. I'm Ramesh from Indium Software. Is there any governance model that is evolved or somebody's drafted on how and what's the limit of AI for the ethics side of it? Anywhere in the world, any country has come out with any model?
So there are now research programs. Stanford announced a program 100 years, some AI initiative, some, or technology and society. They've created a very large program which looks at implications of technology on society on a long-term basis. I know in Nanyang Technological University in Singapore has created again technology and society. So this technology and society seems to be a focus area for some of the academic institutions. European Union has come out with 10-point guidelines for AI, development of AI. So governments, in Indian government also has come out with a I think a report on AI. So multiple reports on AI. So yes, there is awareness, there is initiative from academic institutions. Hopefully IIT Madras will announce something. And this is top of mind for academia, industry, governments, society. Yes.
Hi, Chris Ravi. I liked your, Samir Mehta from Dr. Mehta Hospitals in IIT Madras. I like your observation about people still living in the 1900s. I would argue that SMEs and MSMEs mostly in India kind of like live sometimes maybe not in the 1900s, but in the 2000s. We talk a lot about the big 5 tech firms or the big tech firms and startups. But really most of the jobs are held in the middle order, and most of the job creation actually takes place there. So if I look at our own experience, it's actually tough going for us to find resources as well as, I guess, mind space to solve or at least enter the world of, I guess, either machine learning or AI or basics. We're still on the digitization journey in most healthcare institutions of non-corporatized ecosystems. Do you see, how are we ever going to get accelerated or catalyzed up that journey of being part of this? Or are we going to be left behind and the rich get bigger or a startup overtakes them?
So this is a problem everywhere. Even in the US, except in Facebook, Google, Microsoft, Apple, etc., there are no AI resources. All the best AI resources are with these companies, locked up. Even academic institutions don't have them. Because as soon as somebody does good research, they will recruit them, paying 10 times, 20 times the salary. And so this is a challenge everywhere. I think what we need to do is, so you talked about SME having the largest percentage of employment, right? Employees. Rather than creating new resources, which will take time, we need to look at how can we retrain existing resources. I think that's very, very important, and keep them up to date on the changes that are happening, new programming methodologies, what is machine learning and how do you educate them. For use of the tools that are available, I think this kind of training is sufficient. Some introduction to data sciences. And this is where an institute like IIT Madras, I think, must also contribute in the retrain short-term courses at scale, and maybe using online, offline model, etc. I think we need to look at this. If I look back at the IT services industry invested heavily into creating its own employees.
right? So this wave of technologies actually, we need to retrain and we need to create the new set of employees that are required. And at the top end, we need to create more high-end professionals also. That is also very important. But training is important and retraining is important. Funding of that is important. Partly it will come from government, partly it will come from industry.
Hi, my name
And
is...
the time comes from the individual. All individuals must say that, I'll work 8 hours and maybe 4 hours I'll allocate for retraining myself.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Ganesh. I'm actually the global CTO of a large staffing and recruitment company. And so I would like to put forward a view which is widely held that AI has overpromised and underdelivered. So we know of the much publicized failures of large AI programs such as IBM Watson. I've just learned that the couple of initiatives they took in healthcare, they're rolling back because they could not deliver on their promise. I personally have experience where I funded some AI projects which didn't come to fruition. Also, worrying is that these models are never explainable. I mean, the talk about ethics and so on touched upon it briefly. But the fact of the matter is that to companies, you have a technology which you cannot explain, and that worries them deeply. So just wanted your views on this and what promise AI holds in the short term.
See, there will be some disappointments and every one of these things take time. It won't happen overnight. But I'm optimistic. I'm very clear in my mind that this is a technology whose time has come. But more research has to happen. More research into issues like explainability, issues like how do you certify that the data is without biases? How do you certify that the data is complete? How do you certify that the solution that is coming is the best solution under the circumstances? All of these things are research problems today. And in the meanwhile, this tool will get used in real life problems, with a caveat saying that there may be some mistakes made, but that's the progress of any new technology. Let me put this into context in a very different way. One of the tools that are used by terrorists today is a car or a truck. A lot of the incidents in the last 5 years, if you look at terrorists have used cars or trucks for mowing down people. It's rather unfortunate, but that's what they've done. But that didn't, create a backlash against cars or trucks. Now, of course, we are not talking about terrorism here. We are talking about, technology not being mature. But, basically I wanted to drive a point saying that there will always be concerns about the benefits and the use of technology properly being used, addressing the problems, etc. But these are improvements. There are benefits being, given to society, accruing to society. And hence, I think this will, we need to improve it, but this will be used, no question about it.
So I just wanted to add one thing to it. I just want to rephrase what you said. AI doesn't overpromise. It's the people who are trying to sell AI to you that overpromise. And that is what I have been saying for a long time, that the danger of AI is not the technology itself, it's the people who are using it. So people have to use it responsibly.
Right.
So with that, we'll thank Chris for sharing his wonderful views with us today.
So I was very glad that I didn't have to be the timekeeper. Thank you, Ravi, for stopping this. I mean, wonderful session, but I'll encourage all of you to have a conversation over the refreshment break we're going to have now. Here are just few announcements before we break. The refreshment break is going to happen in the AC dining hall, to my left, this side. About half an hour we would have. Post that, we're going to have 3 parallel sessions. Right? The AI in engineering roundtable is going to happen in this room. So those of you who registered for AI in engineering, you could come back here. The AI and ethics, fairness and explainability is going to happen in hall 3, which is to this side, next to the elevator. There are lots of signs, you can't get lost. And then the AI for the next billion users in India is going to happen in hall 2, which is over that side, right? That's the other announcement. Refreshments here. Now I'll request all the speakers, anchors, and organizers to come up on stage for a group photograph. We want to capture you when you are at the freshest. Thank you. Now please join.
Not
please.
after you are all bloodied after the roundtable discussion. So.